Lesson 1: Ethos, Pathos, and Logos. In this first lesson, I will be telling you what those terms mean, how they are used, why they are used, and other forms of media in which they are used. Before we move on the lesson, let us define the terms. First, ethos is an appeal to ethics, and it aims to give credibility of the persuader. Second, pathos appeals to emotion and aims to convince an audience of an argument by invoking an emotional response. And lastly, logos. Logos appeals to logic and is a way of persuading an audience by reason. I can probably guess you're sitting in your seat asking yourself, who in the world will use these silly terms? Well, I can tell you, companies like Coca-Cola, Disney, and other big companies use these strategies to attract potential customers to hopefully buy or use their products. Now that you have a better understanding of what these strategies are, let's look at them in action. Please pause this podcast to take a look at the videos so you can see the difference between each of the strategies used, and so that it may help you in the future. Now that we know the more formal definitions and have seen them at work in different variations of advertisements, we can begin to ask the question, how else and in what ways are these strategies used in other forms of media? Now that we know the other common uses of these strategies can be seen in many, if not all, books or plays, and including the ever so wonderful phrase, blank is better than the book. That's right, I'm talking about the movies. Let's take a look at how they are used in other forms of media. Writers and directors use a certain scene or a quote to invoke a message or a response. Now that the boring and monotonous explanations are out of the way, let's get to some examples. The first example is for the use of these strategies in books. And in order to help you guys better understand this, I will be using a quote from the book, The Fault in Our Stars. The quote reads, "You gave me a forever within the numbered days, and I'm grateful." End quote. From reading this quote, you would most likely feel sadness, happiness, or a little bit of both, depending on how you want to perceive it. But the main emotion here is sadness. And in order to convey this feeling, John Green, writer or author, employs the use of pathos. When it comes to books, I feel as though writers have it the easiest because they simply write the saying for the certain moment in time, but it is ultimately up to you, the reader, whether or not you want to feel it. For example number 2, I will be using the movies as a way to convey using ethos, pathos, and logos in the other forms of media category. But before I begin, please take a moment and pause this podcast to watch this clip. The scene you just saw was from the movie Heaven is for Real, and the scene invokes a happy emotion because from the clip you can see that Colton, the little boy, is in a state of bliss, and normally bliss means happiness. This scene uses pathos to invoke that emotion of happiness. And to hopefully help better understand this idea, I will turn the mic over to my good friend, Morgan Freeman. Morgan? Thank you. While it is the director's job to get us, the actors, to act out and do the scene to the best of our ability, it is our job, as the actor, to deliver and make the scene as powerful and emotional as it's meant to be. That's why I'm cast in very emotional and, well, dramatic movies. I'd like to consider myself a pathos actor because I like to deliver the most emotion that I can in different scenes. In the movie The Magic of Belle Isle, I played an alcoholic novelist who lost his drive to write. But through the inspiration of 2 young girls and their mother, I reclaimed my passion for writing. The whole movie was a roller coaster of emotion. Well, while I play roles that mostly fit pathos, I also occasionally play roles centered around ethos and logos. For example, in Now You'll See Me, I played the role of Thaddeus Bradley, At the end of the movie, I used logos to convince the audience that I was not the criminal. Oops, please forgive me. I bantered on too long. Let me give the map to Ryan so that he can continue to teach you wonderful kids. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Now back to you. Thank you, Morgan. I really appreciate your take on ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, I promise this is the last example of ethos, pathos, and logos in action. Majority of us watch the news, I hope. News channels use ethos, pathos, and logos all the time when they want to grip us and draw us in so they will watch a certain story. When the news talks about investing in a certain company, they attract us using the strategy of logos because we want to know why we should invest and what or why it's beneficial to us. Second, channels like ESPN sometimes have celebrities on to get their take on a certain issue, such as like maybe the Colin Kaepernick kneeling incident, or maybe a NBA game or something of that nature, because we want to know that they're calling what they say. But most of the time, they also use pathos when they bring us a breaking news story. If news channels did not utilize these tactics, no one, and I mean no one, would watch the news because it'll just be boring old weather. By now, I hope you are familiar with the "ain't nobody got time for that" lady. Because when this story first aired, there were plenty of emotions, from happiness because they were laughing or because they were just happy to see Miss Sweet Brown, pictured here, was safe. Sadness may also be identified because they were sorrowful on account of damage that was done to her apartment and other apartments in the area. However, regardless of what events transpired, it's safe to say that this news channel aired this segment because it invoked certain emotions using pathos, and if they didn't air it, it would just be another story of an apartment fire, and people around America would be saying, "Ain't nobody got time for that." This concludes the podcast for Lesson 1. Hopefully, now you all have a better understanding of what ethos, pathos, and logos are and how they are used in advertisements, movies, books, and so on. Please stay tuned for Lesson 2, which will be coming up shortly. Lesson 2. Identifying character, plot, setting, and theme in literature and other works. Before we go too deep into the lesson, let us first familiarize ourselves with the terms given here. First up is character, and character can be defined as any person or figure represented in a literary work. Second, plot describes the events that make up a story or the main part of a story. Setting is where the story takes place, and theme is the meaning of the story or other literary work. When it comes to character, there are many types of characters, but just for today, we're only going to be going over 4 types, and those 4 types are the main character, the minor character, the static character, and the dynamic character. To start, the main character is the person or figure that receives most of the action and has the biggest effect on the plot. Every story or work of literature or other form must have a main character, and they don't have to have just one. They can have 2, 3, 4, or as many as they need for the particular work. Let's look at some examples of main characters. Example 1. In William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the main characters in the play were Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet. Now that's common knowledge. But in example 2, in the movie Lone Survivor, the main character is hospital corpsman, first class Marcus Luttrell, who is portrayed by Mark Wahlberg. Both of these examples, as listed, are examples of the main characters, and next we will begin to learn about minor characters. A minor character is a person or figure who is not of central importance to the plot. Minor characters and main characters share same characteristics, and they also are unlike too as well. The similarity is that there can be more than one minor character, just like there can be more than one main character. But where the difference is that unlike main characters, they tend to mix into the background and slowly become of no importance to the plot as said in the definition. Here are some examples of minor characters. In example 1, the book Outsiders by S.E. Hinton portrays two minor characters, and their names are Cherry and her friend Marcia. They are minor characters because they don't really play a huge role in the main plot. They're just kind of there to add depth and tell us what's going on, and more importantly, they just kind of are there to. They're fillers mostly. For example, 2, the movie Lion King, there are 3 minor characters, and those are the hyenas, which are named Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed. And I'm actually going to use them for a later example because they also portray characteristics of a static character, which I will be getting to later. When it comes to static characters, there's not really much you need to know other than that it's a character who stays the same and doesn't change throughout a story or other type of work. Their personality and how they act stays constant, or their heroic deeds stay constant, or their evil deeds stay constant. They don't change. They just throughout the whole movie or story. For my first example, I'm going to use Sherlock Holmes. In Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock is the same witty, clever, and oftentimes prudent investigator in the end as he is in the beginning, and that's why he's a good candidate for an example of static, because he just doesn't change, he stays constant. For the second example, like I said, in The Lion King, the 3 hyenas, Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed, stay the same because their personas and antics don't change even at the end of the film. They're just the same stupid, or Shenzi is a more logical hyena than Banzai and Ed. Ed's the stupid one, Banzai's just the crazy one. But essentially, they do not change. But if I had to pick a example of, or who is more of a static character, I would pick Sherlock because he shows the most, or not really shows the most, but he exemplifies the characteristics of a static character because he does not change throughout the book. A dynamic character is one who changes the most from beginning to end, and the main character is usually the one who is considered the dynamic character. For dynamic character, I'm only going to be using one example because only one example is needed to understand it better. The example I'm going to use is Anakin Skywalker from the Star Wars saga. I consider him a dynamic character because out of every character in the Star Wars universe and the movies, he exemplifies the most change, because from episode 1, he began as the little boy who loved his mother and just loved pod racing. In episode 2, he progressed to a reckless Jedi who just acted on impulse and didn't think. But in episode 3 is where he showed the most change because he began to embrace the dark side, and eventually that led him to fight his former mentor, master, and friend, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then as the series progressed, or not series, but saga progressed from 4, 5, and 6, we see Anakin Skywalker change into Darth Vader, who is the main antagonist of the story. And from episode 1 to 6, we can see major changes from Anakin and his transition to Darth Vader, and that is why he is considered the dynamic character of the saga, because he goes from good to ultimately evil in a matter of 3 episodes. As we already know, the plot is the central conflict of the story, and other general knowledge is that the plot is a scenario that a character faces throughout a novel or a movie. However, there is usually only one plot. There's also such things called subplots, but we're not going to get to that now. We're just going to focus on the main aspects of the plot. However, there is more to plot than meets the eye. When it comes to the plot, there are three main components that make up the plot, and those are the conflict, climax, and the resolution. The conflict is the problem the character faces, the climax is the high point of the plot, and the resolution is a solution to the conflict. Without these three elements, there would be no plot, and the story would be boring. I could have used so many examples from different movies and books to use as an example for the plot, but I decided to choose Star Wars because for me it's the easiest to explain, and you guys would be able to understand it as well because hopefully you've seen Star Wars. But let's get to it. In Episode 2, the conflict was Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan were captured by the Separatists, and the Jedi needed to rescue them. The climax was when the Jedi arrived on the planet Geonosis and an all-out battle ensued in the arena. And after a long and tough fought battle, the resolution was that Master Yoda and some clones came to the rescue of the surviving Jedi. Out of all four of the elements listed, setting is probably the most important and the easiest to identify. Without the setting, readers and audience members would be confused as to where the story is taking place. At that point, they would be making up places where it could take place that probably wouldn't make sense to the book, play, or movie. And if that's the case, then in the Bible, Jesus' crucifixion could have taken place at the North Pole. Imagine that. Now, here are two examples of setting. Example 1. The setting of the fight between Goku and Frieza that took 20 episodes to complete was set on the planet of Namek. Example 2. The setting of the movie Titanic was set in the Atlantic Ocean. While the setting of a story or a movie is easy to identify, theme is not. Now, most students may have a problem identifying the theme, and that's because it's not normally easy to decipher. For most themes, it requires a student or someone who wants to look at it to look deeper and critically think to find it. Every story has a theme, you just have to look for it. Some stories may have multiple themes. They're there, trust me. Like we've always done, let's go find some examples of theme. For example 1, To Kill a Mockingbird has many themes. 3 of the themes are race, ethics, and fear. Example 2. Just like To Kill a Mockingbird, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas has many themes, but for the sake of this podcast, I'm just going to do one. And that one theme is family. This concludes Lesson 2. Please stay tuned for Lesson 3. It'll be coming up in just a few moments. Lesson 3. Public Speaking. It's understandable that most students and even some adults have a fear of public speaking. But what's interesting is that the fear of public speaking even tops arachnophobia, the fear of heights, and the fear of insects. While this is unavoidable, it is a necessary thing that everyone has to do at some point for class or for work. If you think about it, public speaking isn't really that hard. It's actually pretty easy if you make it. By this I mean, you shouldn't get too worked up about it, and it shouldn't be something that drives you crazy and something that should keep you from doing something you want to do. In order to get over this fear, one thing that you can do is just make it your own. Some find humor is a good way to help ease the tension. And they think this way because using humor helps to lighten up a mood and create a stress-free environment. And really, who doesn't love to laugh? When it comes to suppressing your fear, there are many ways to put the fear on hold so that you can deliver an A+ paper. Or speech, for that matter. One way is practice. Ever heard the saying, practice makes perfect? Well, that rings true. Practicing always seems to be the best method because when you get to your speech, it makes you more confident, and practicing also helps with your movement, which will be discussed next. Once you get comfortable and decide to put your fear of public speaking aside, you can now focus on delivering that amazing paper. There are many ways to deliver that bomb paper that your professor would love to tape to her fridge. And the ways are engagement, vocal tone, movements, gestures, and posture. let's take a look at those. The next step to becoming a better speaker is engagement. The deciding factor is engagement because it will determine how well your speech will go. But one of the main proponents of engagement is the attention getter. And the attention getter is your first few sentences in your speech that will grab your audience. And the purpose of an attention getter is to excite your audience and to pique their interest. The attention getters can be interesting, gripping, or just downright depressing. The goal of an attention getter is to set the tone for how the rest of your speech will go. This is an example of a strong attention getter. Close your eyes. Imagine sitting in a dark room. No doors, no windows, no light. You can't escape it. No matter how hard you try, it holds you down and won't let go. No matter how loud you scream, no one will hear you. This is what it's like living with depression. The next step is vocal tone. Out of all 4 ideas, vocal tone is the most important. I mean, who wants to listen to a monotone and boring speaker? See, no one. In order to have good vocal tone, you must speak loudly, clearly, and with enough enthusiasm. Or else you'll sound like this throughout the whole thing and nobody will really want to listen to you. But you got to keep it like this. You got to talk really upbeat, loud. Well, not loud, but, with excitement. Ooh, change the inflection a little bit maybe. This is sure to keep your audience attention throughout the whole speech. You're probably sitting there asking yourself, what's the difference? Well, in order to find out, please click on each sound icon to hear the difference between poor vocal tone and excellent vocal tone. To show the difference, I will be using advertisements. So, whenever you're ready, pause the podcast and listen away. And then, at the end, tell me, which product do you want to buy more? The one with the poor vocal tone or the one with the excellent vocal tone? I can't really tell you. That's for you to decide. The next step to becoming a good speaker is that of movements and gesture. When it comes to gestures and movements, it's best to keep them at a minimum. Moving around is okay, but make sure it is done sparingly. If you move around too much, audiences will lose focus because they would get tired of following you around throughout the speech. Like movements, gestures are okay as well, just please keep them at a minimum. Too many gestures and doing them rapidly will look like you're flailing around with no purpose, and that just doesn't look right. It looks odd. The best kind of gesture any speaker can do is eye contact. Out of everything on the list, eye contact es muy importante. It's important because using eye contact will make your audience feel loved and they will get the sensation that you are including them in your speech. Please take note though. Look up every few seconds from your paper, because if you don't, you'll be constantly looking down at the paper and this will cause you to speak into your paper and not your audience. Thus, they will not be able to hear you. The last step to becoming a better speaker is posture. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on posture because it's the most simplistic out of the 4, and it's simple. As I said, posture is very simple. Just stand up tall and just relax. But don't relax to where you begin to slouch, because then you'll just look like a slob and nobody wants to listen to you. But having good posture will make you feel large and in charge, which will ultimately make you a better speaker. Now that you know how to become a better speaker and you have practiced some of the necessary skills, go out and knock your next speech out of the park. And make sure it's legend. Wait for it. Dairy. This concludes the podcast for Lesson 3. I hope you learned a lot throughout all 3 of these podcasts and take what you learned to help you out in the real world and maybe schooling in the future. Please wait for the next slide for a special surprise.